I was on TV for the first time in my life on 9/11, and it was not a happy occasion.
Millionen von Leuten standen mit ihnen auf der Straße. Ich nehme an, vor allem beim zweiten Flugzeug brach Panik aus.
Das ist richtig. Es sind also Leute, wir haben Leute gesehen, die persönlich von dem Dach, von dem World Trade Center in den Tod gesprungen sind, weil sie es einfach nicht aushalten konnten, evakuiert zu werden. Es war eine Panik. Aber ich muss ehrlich sagen, dass die Leute auf der Straße sich sehr nobel benommen haben und also nach einer anfänglichen Panik sehr gut reagiert haben und relativ ruhig dann einfach nach Norden evakuiert worden sind.
Dann waren Sie nicht mehr dabei, als das Gebäude eingestürzt ist?
Ich habe das Gebäude persönlich einstürzen sehen und das war eigentlich der größte Schock, weil das war das Symbol von US-Kapitalismus und das Symbol von New York schlussendlich. Also die Skyline von New York sieht völlig anders aus jetzt als noch vor 4-5 Stunden oder 7 Stunden.
Vielen Dank, Thomas Zweifel.
So I sit at 8:46 in the morning, 200 meters from the World Trade Center, and suddenly the first plane hits the World Trade Center, and millions of metallic glitters of, it looked like metal, were blowing towards me with the wind. It was a perfectly blue day. And when they came closer, I suddenly saw that these were millions and millions of pieces of paper. One of them I actually picked up. It's a page from a law book. It's blackened on all sides. It still gets to me today. Victims' Compensation Fund, kind of a strange irony for a text of a law book on 9/11. But you might think that this is a very big event. This is an event that changes world history. But my life changed on the next day. I was actually sitting again in the same place, mourning the 2,700 people who died in that attack. And a rabbi comes up to me, and on a normal day in New York, I would say, buzz off, okay? You know, I don't need to talk to anybody, leave me alone. On that day, I was so shaken and so vulnerable and raw that I decided to say, hi, let's talk. And this is the rabbi, and the other guy is me, without a beard, so this was a few years ago. And the rabbi and I became friends, and we wrote a book together, the rabbi and the CEO, and we coached each other, and I learned so much from him. You know, through this tiny little encounter, I learned, for example, that small things matter. So a few years later, I had a conversation, a lunch with my business partner, Jori Wurmser, in New York, and he said, you know, if everything goes wrong with the women of New York, I have a beautiful cousin in Zurich. And I said, that's very nice, thank you very much. You know, the market is big in New York. You know, and then I forgot about it, which is very unlike me. I usually don't forget stuff. But I forgot this, and 2 years later, I'm on assignment teaching in Switzerland, and I feel terribly lonely. And I decided, what's the opportunity? I'm going to call this beautiful cousin in Zurich, right? So I get the email from Jori, which took a long time. I'm not going to go into that. So I call her, we have a blind date in Zurich, Treffpunkt, and I fly back to New York, beautiful date, fly back to New York, call my mother in Sydney, and I tell her, I think I met the woman of my dreams. And my mother says, oh, that's very nice. What's her name? And I say, Gabriel Wurmser. And she says, Wurmser, for Bülach. So I call Jori, I call my business partner, he says, yeah, that's my grandfather. So this is Alfred Wurmser, Jori's grandfather, and the blind date's grandfather, right, who proposed to my grandmother, on the right, in 1923. Okay? So she refused him. Thank God. So, yeah. She was the daughter of the rabbi of Zurich. She said, you know, you're not good enough for me. I'm going to refuse you. So 85 years later, I proposed to my wife. I give her my grandparents' engagement ring, and I say, I'd like to make up for the injustice done to your family 86 years ago. Okay. And my wife, she hates that I'm doing this, but my wife is sitting up there. Hi, Gabriel. I love you. I know this is way too public. She finds this very embarrassing that I do these public things, these public displays of affection. It's so embarrassing, peinlich. But you're the most important thing that happened to me. And I learned from you, actually, the power of small. I learned that it matters whether I put a helmet on Hannah's head, our two daughters, right? So small things matter. But they don't only matter in our personal life. So let's keep looking here. Oh, this is actually our wedding picture. Just to keep going a little bit with show and tell here. So we built a Jewish home, and in a Jewish home, you have to have a mezuzot. And a mezuzah is the casing on the left. It actually is a little casing that contains a prayer, and the prayer is on the right here. It's called the Shema Yisrael. Basically, listen, Israel. Listen is always a good thing. So it is a prayer that if one letter is invalidated in the prayer, if one letter is not correct or it's broken, the entire prayer will be invalid and the mezuzah will not be working to protect the house. So the house will not be safe. Now, you might think, that's a little superstitious, a little bit ridiculous, but those kinds of details can actually change lives or change history. This is an example. Now I'm going to go big picture, macro. This is the Cuban Missile Crisis, which none of you remember, fortunately. 1962, JFK is confronting the Russians in Cuba. It's a real danger of World War III, and he gives the order to end the blockade. Okay? The only problem is the order is not making it down the chain of command because the standard operating procedures don't allow for that. So, Kennedy goes to sleep. He has not slept like Manal. He has not slept for 2 weeks, okay? He goes to sleep. But were it not for Robert Kennedy, his brother, who actually followed the order down the chain of command and had to yell at the ship's captain to please end the blockade, we would have had World War III. So that's an example. To keep going, 40 years later, the Columbia Space Shuttle collapsed tragically, and all the astronauts on board died. It's because of one tiny thing, a piece of foam that dislodged from the Columbia. You may remember this. But why did this happen? NASA had standard operating procedures, and they didn't follow them. To save money, they skirted on the details. So they basically reduced slideshows from 120 slides to sometimes one slide, and the detail about the foam actually got nixed in the waste paper basket. So the consequence is death. A business example, Microsoft going to China. Maybe you don't even remember this, but Windows 95, does anybody remember that? Okay, good. Makes me feel less alone. So Windows 95, Microsoft wants to launch it in China, so they have the software translated into Chinese. They make one tiny mistake. They hire, instead of mainland Chinese software developers, they hire Taiwanese. Tiny little mistake, okay? The Taiwanese programmers pepper the software with references like, take back the mainland and kill the communist bastards. Okay, so these pop-up windows come up. The Chinese government looks at the operating system, and these pop-up windows appear, and the Chinese government is not very happy. So they back Linux. This is a 1.4 billion computer mistake. It's a tiny little thing that impacts the fact that Microsoft was then 10 years later in entering the Chinese market. It also happens in legal affairs. I hope and pray that you will never have to go to jail, because if you're in front of a parole officer, it makes a difference whether the parole officer has eaten lunch or dinner or not yet, okay? So you see how right after the meal break, they make favorable rulings. Before the meal break, it's terrible. You go back to jail. Okay, so I pray that if you're in front of a parole officer, that you will always be in front of a well-fed judge. Okay? Now, this also plays in business, though, and I want to show you how business leaders actually use details. And it's a very funny thing, because most CEOs and executives and senior managers that I know tend to think the big stuff is what matters, right? You got to, as a CEO, you got to be in charge of vision and strategy, and you have to move the mountains, okay? And you delegate the small stuff to the secretaries or your underlings. I would assert that it's exactly the opposite. The small stuff is what makes the difference. This is Richard Branson dressing up as a flight attendant. You see him here with other flight attendants who are a little bit shocked about his appearance. That's not the point. The point is, you know, he's willing to do stuff that's below his pay grade to actually make a difference. For example, he came to Heathrow when a plane was late, a Virgin plane was late, arriving in Heathrow. He comes personally to the gate and says, I apologize for the plane being late. Now, obviously, it's a marketing trick as well, but the key is he makes a small action that then makes a huge difference for the brand, and I think was a factor in him becoming a billionaire. Now, I want to show you how you do this, because so far we've seen details that you don't really have a lot of control over. Now I want to show you how you can do this around you so that your performance will be maximized. This is a very funny example from a British office where people pay for the milk that they put in their coffee, right? So it's a kitchen, coffee machine, people pay for the milk. It's an honor system, so you know how that works, right? Some people pay, most people don't, okay? So they decide to actually put posters in, behind the coffee machine, okay? They put, one week they put a poster with a flower, second week a poster with eyes, third week a poster with flowers. You get the pattern, right? On the right, you see how much money people put. With the flower weeks, they put this much money. With the eye weeks, they put this much money. On average, when people feel observed by the eyes on the poster, they give 3 times as much money. Kind of amazing, yeah? You could try that. Now, but to be more serious, those kinds of displays, what you put around you, make a difference in life and death. And this is an example from Johns Hopkins, where they discovered in intensive care units that there are certain steps that you have to follow, right? If you're a doctor, you have to put on your cap and put on your gloves and wash your hands and put on your gown. I'm doing this in the wrong order, but you got to go check, 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 okay? They discovered, the nurses actually followed around the doctors, and they discovered that basically all the doctors miss at least one step with 1/3 of their patients. That makes a huge difference because people die, okay? So this is to prevent line infections. They actually had the nurses walk around with this checklist, okay? And the checklist was simply, had to be checked off by the doctor. You know what they did? And there's this Jewish proverb that says, if you save one life, it saves all of humanity. They saved 1,500 lives with this program. They saved $175 million in healthcare costs, and it cost them $500,000 for the entire program. So it's a 35,000% return on investment. That's pretty good. So checklists matter. Now I want to show you how I do this in my own life. This is my desk. This might make Gabriel a little bit embarrassed again, but this is my desk. You see the phone on the left, you see my laptop, you see the HSG mug there. You see my smoothie, and you see a quote by Hillel, which I keep close at hand, and the quote goes, if I am not for myself, then who will be? But if I'm only for myself, then what am I? And if not now, when? This is my favorite quote, so I wanted to share it with you. You obviously don't have to do it like me, okay? I'm not saying do it like me. I'm saying invent your own displays that will inspire you, that will give you a future, that will give you inspiration. This is the quote bigger now. Okay? That was kind of a cool effect, actually. Now I want to show you what I'm doing with all the stuff, all the details that come into my head, right? Because there's a lot of different details. Sometimes my wife asks me to buy the milk, or I want to build a strategy for Airbus, or I want to write a Harvard Business Review article. So there's all this stuff that comes into your head, like you should do, you will do, you want to do, you don't want to do, but you have to do, okay? So I put all of this into a funnel, okay? I just call it a funnel, it's in my phone, and put it all down, okay? Once a day, I will download, basically dump everything from the funnel into my calendar, and here's my calendar. Okay, so the funnel is here. So calendar goes like this. I have my priorities up here. This becomes very, very Swiss and detail-oriented here. These are my A1 priorities that come with me for the week. Okay, so I know exactly what I want to do this week. Then I got little rituals in my life. So every day at 9, I will call a client, and I will add value to that client's life. Every day at 10, I will do something around writing, whether it's writing my books, because I noticed I cannot write in the afternoon. It's too chaotic, okay? Got to write in the morning. I will then write my books or do something that will be a product, like work on the TEDx talk. At 1 o'clock every day, I will do my emails. By the way, this may sound like a prison to you, but it's not. It's actually to be in charge of my life and to be in charge of my calendar and my time. Time is just a resource, and on Friday I will do basically my setting of the priorities for next week. What do I really want to do? What do I need to say no to for next week? And then I got personal stuff that's in blue. I got, what is this? I got my early morning routine where I thank God for being alive, and I thank God for giving me a great wife. I got my piano at 6 p.m. I badminton on Wednesday night and swimming on Sunday. So again, this might sound like a prison, but it's actually, these are all things that fulfill me, that give me life, that I want to do, okay? And then comes the clicker, or the, what do you call it? The kicker, not the clicker. This is the clicker, and the kicker comes. The kicker is this. It's a list of what I will never do. So there's all the stuff that I don't find time to do, or that I think I should be doing. If I was a better person, or if I was more efficient or more effective, I would also do all these other things. And I put a list called never, okay, on which I put all the obligations. And this is like my declaration of emancipation in my life. I think I should do an HBR article. I'm not going to do that. I am not going to learn Chinese. I'm not going to learn Tai Chi, okay? Even though I think I should, and all that stuff. Okay, so that's the never list, and I look at that never list once a month, and then sometimes I put something back into my calendar. For example, the piano was on my never list for about 3 years. Now I discovered that I'm in good company. Geniuses, unlike me, geniuses actually did rituals on a daily basis to get inspiration. Beethoven took a daily walk with a pencil and paper. I'm not going to go through all of them, but Bill Gates takes think weeks off the grid, where he actually comes up with innovations and thinks new thoughts that are not given by the pressures around him. Churchill sat at his pond. Mark Zuckerberg vowed to thank somebody every day. So those are little rituals that can actually change your life. Now, you might think that there's some details that are irrelevant. Okay, you might think of Viagra ads. Okay, they're not relevant for me, thank God. So, sorry. So it all depends on what frame you have. What's your frame, and that will determine whether a detail is relevant or not. And I call this the bottle. What is the bottle? And the bottle is basically what comes from the past. I'll give you an example. The Kotzker Rebbe said, it's easier to get the Jews out of Egypt than it is to get Egypt out of the Jews. Okay, so I don't know how you translate that into your life, but it's basically, to change your mindset is one of the hardest things, right? You could change your geography, you could move to Australia, but are you changing your mindset? And that is your bottle. Your bottle is basically given from the past. It determines what your mindset is. It then determines your actions, and it finally determines your results. So if you get the wrong results, or if you don't do something, you might want to ask yourself, what's the bottle in which I'm caught? And a bottle could be life is a struggle. For some people, like Stan Wawrinka, you know, it's a struggle to play tennis. For somebody else, like Roger Federer, it's not a struggle, it's a graceful phenomenon, okay? For somebody, an example of a bottle could be, I must go to work, okay? If you must go to work and you wake up every morning, must go to work, then work will show up consistent with that bottle, you understand? So this can also play at the collective level. I once, bless you, no, that's important. Those are details that are important. I once worked for a company, and we discovered that their bottle was, our best days are behind us. If you're a company and your best days are behind you, can you imagine what you can still do in the future? Not very much. Okay, so check your bottle and then make sure that your details are consistent with that. So I just want to remind us, and this may sound ridiculous, but I want to remind us that none of us would be sitting here were it not for a little detail called conception. So somebody put a sperm into some egg and then you became alive, right? So let's remember that we all came from a little detail. So a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. And what's funny is that little detail of a conception looks almost like the Big Bang that started the universe. So I just want to close with one quick story about one of my heroes, Mahatma Gandhi. There was a woman who came to Mahatma Gandhi, and she traveled with a rickshaw, with a bus, with a train, and she finally stood in front of Gandhi with her 8-year-old boy, and Gandhi says, "What do you want?" And she says, "Tell my son here to stop eating sugar." Okay, Gandhi says, "Come back in 2 weeks." Okay, you know, she's a little puzzled, but she goes back, it's the Mahatma Gandhi, goes back to her village. 2 weeks later, she makes the entire trip again. Rickshaw, bus, train. She finally stands in front of Gandhi again with her 8-year-old son, and he says, "What do you want?" And she says, "Now, tell my son to stop eating sugar." Gandhi bows down and says, "Stop eating sugar." The woman blows up. She says, "Mahatma Gandhi, why did you not tell me 2 weeks ago? I could have saved the entire trip." Gandhi says, 2 weeks ago, I was eating sugar. Thank you very much.